Many thanks to my supporters on Patreon. If you'd like to join them, check the link in the description. But now, enjoy the video. Gran Turismo 3 is a tough game, no doubt about it. In fact, being such a challenge is arguably one of the things it's best known for. Like most Gran Turismos, you start from the bottom of the ladder and have to gradually work your way up by winning races, which earns you money as well as new cars. However, in the beginning, it can seem like you're not really making any progress. The combination of relatively slim payouts and prize cars that are often worse than the car you need to win them in the first place has discouraged many players and even spawned its own memes. And that's without talking about the difficulty of the races themselves or the dreaded license tests. Because of this, many people have barely scratched the surface of what GT3 has to offer, and I think that's a real shame. Almost as a direct result, the next title in the series, Gran Turismo 4, took a very different approach. Here, many high-end cars are given out in relatively early game events, and the ability to earn each of these cars over and over again also creates a number of money-making exploits. Last year, I made a video detailing 14 examples of events that offer a significant progression skip within GT4. However, you might be surprised to find out that, despite how it may appear on the surface, GT3 contains a number of progression skips as well. That's not to say that they're anywhere near as obvious as GT4's, but if you dig a bit deeper and apply a decent amount of strategy, what you'll find is possible may actually surprise you. So, if you watched my previous video on GT4, you'll know the drill. But in case you didn't, we're looking for events that give out prize cars that are significantly better than the car you need to use to beat the event, and or can be sold for a large amount of credits which you can then use to buy much faster cars. Simple enough, right? Well, with GT3, there's another layer we need to cover first. Because it's all well and good saying, beat this event for mid-tier sports cars to win this high-end race car, but doing that would ignore a key point. How do you get in a position to win these events in the first place? As I touched on in the intro, breaking out of the early game is actually the most challenging part of GT3, and spoiler alert, none of the events I'll be covering can be found in the beginner league. So, before we begin, I thought I'd give you all a few strategies to help with the early game, and thus get yourself into the position of beating the events I'll be covering. The first point is that the NA Mazda Roadster is the optimal starter car, not just because it's the fastest, but also because it gains a huge amount of power from fitting a turbo kit. This means that if you invest all of your prize winnings into it, you can actually build it into a car that can take on amateur league events a lot sooner than you might expect. However, some of the other possible starter cars can also lead you down effective routes. The PT Cruiser, for example, whilst not being as good of a tuning basis, can be upgraded to the point of winning the beginner Stars and Stripes event in a reasonable amount of time. This feat is actually a lot easier than it might seem, as the opponents here are nerfed significantly. From this, you win the Chevrolet Camaro SS sporting around 330 horsepower. With a few upgrades like weight reduction, suspension, and some better tyres, this car is also a very solid choice in the amateur league. The Volkswagen Beetle is another possible first car, and by again clearing out a few early game events and upgrading it as you go, you can use it to beat the one-make Beetle Cup. You will face Beetle Cup cars, so it isn't exactly easy, but if you can get it done, your prize is the new Beetle RSI. With the Beetle Cup also being a championship event, you earn an extra 10k bonus which you can use for upgrades, once again building it into a pretty decent amateur league weapon. But if you prefer to save up your money in the early game and then splash out on something a bit faster, I think the Lancer Evos are pretty good options. The cheapest of these is the Evo 7 RS, coming in at just a touch over 25 grand. But the slightly more expensive Evo 6 RS is another choice. These cars also benefit from having their own one-make events in both the beginner and amateur leagues, and they're very good platforms for tuning as well. If you choose to spend your cash on a Honda Type R instead, like the Accord, Civic, or Integra, you can take on the beginner Type R meeting. Winning this event will give you the Acura RSX, which isn't really much of an upgrade. But in the PAL version of GT3 specifically, this car can be sold for 75,000 credits, easily enough money to propel you out of the early game. As this event is also a championship, this means that the RSX can be won multiple times, making it the best repeatable money-making method in the early game, and potentially a progression skip in its own right. Whilst we're on the topic of specific versions of GT3, I should mention that these methods are a lot tougher to achieve if you're playing the original Japanese release of the game. Here, you start off with only 15,000 credits, and you generally earn less money from completing races as well, which limits your options quite a bit. But for Western players, these are all pretty good routes that should set you up to carry out the progression skips I'm going to cover. But saying that, there is one pretty major method that you can pull off without any setup whatsoever. With this video, I generally want to focus on methods that most people will be able to do. As such, I won't be talking about the license tests. Here, you can get prize cars by earning all gold times, a few of which do offer significant progression skips. However, this is still the era of gold times only being possible for the top 1% of players, if not even fewer. So to include them here wouldn't really be fair. But what I do want to talk about are the arcade mode time trials. These are available as soon as you start the game, with your task being to beat the developer's own times across these 10 car and track combos. While still not exactly being easy, they are noticeably not as tough as getting all gold licenses. With a bit of perseverance, I think most players have the potential to beat them. But despite the bar being lower than the license tests, the reward is actually far greater. If you can achieve the top time on all 10 time trials, you earn the Peugeot Esperante GTR1 for use in the main GT mode. This is a GT1 race car that obviously far exceeds anything else you can start the game with. Provided you then go on to earn the necessary licenses, this effectively gives you a free pass directly into the late game events. Given just how broken this method is, arguably even more so than any of the ones in GT4, you have to assume that the developers didn't really expect people to take on these time trials so soon. And if you're playing the game for the first time, you most likely wouldn't. Something else that new players are not likely to take on straight away are the endurance races, but doing so can also lead to unexpected outcomes. The barriers to entry for these events are a fair bit higher, as you'll need an International A license, which takes roughly 50 minutes to earn assuming you don't have any major issues, and of course a suitable car. However, one of these races makes that second point much easier to achieve. The Roadster Endurance is a one-make event for the Mazda Roadster, a car which you can buy as your starter, like I covered earlier. But being an endurance race that lasts well over an hour, to be competitive you will need to upgrade to racing tyres. So before taking it on, first clear out a few early game races to make the 10,000 credits you need to get the super slick tyres. Also make sure not to upgrade the car in any other way, as this isn't allowed in the event. Whilst you'll almost certainly be outpaced by the lead AI, your harder tyres mean that you can go much longer without having to make a pit stop. As long as you keep a reasonable speed, you'll be able to win this race at a canter. But when it comes to your prize car, this is where things get interesting. In GT3, endurance races as well as championship events have a prize roulette where you can win one of 4 cars seemingly at random. In the Roadster Endurance, 3 of these 4 are just more Mazda Roadsters, but the other is far more interesting. For every single endurance race, one of the prize cars is a Formula 1 machine. Now, there are multiple F1 cars in this game with differing levels of performance, but as each of them can be used to win pretty much any event they're eligible for, naturally they're all desirable. This means that with the Roadster Endurance, you have a 1 in 4 chance of completely breaking the game. And if not, you still get 100,000 credits for your trouble. Unless of course you're playing on an emulator, at which point you can make a save state just before receiving your prize and keep reloading it until you get the one you want. However, this is yet another way in which the original Japanese version of GT3 differs. Over there, your prize is determined before you even start the race, but this actually means that you can manipulate the game into giving you the exact prize you want even without save states. T-Kanji has an excellent video covering all of this which I'll link in the description, but this won't be the last time we talk about manipulating the roulette. The arcade time trials and the Roadster Endurance are without a doubt the 2 most well-known ways to break GT3 wide open, but that doesn't mean they're the only ones. Far from it in fact. As I said, every endurance race has a 1 in 4 chance to win an F1 car, and some of the other prizes on offer still represent a pretty major upgrade. Passage to Colosseo is a 2-hour event at Rome circuits that you can win with a moderately fast road car. By far the toughest opponents are the TVR Griffith and Renault Clio V6, but it is possible that neither of them appear, which lowers the barrier to entry even further. For winning, your possible prizes are an F1 car, as well as the Lancia Delta Rally car, Gillet Vertigo race car, and Pagani Zonda LM. The Trial Mountain 2 hours endurance has you up against Japanese sports cars like the Honda NSX and Nissan Skyline GTR. Bear in mind that aside from tyres, the car you use cannot be upgraded, so it'll have to be decently fast out of the box if you want to win. And if you do win, alongside the token F1 car, you'll find the Mine's N1 Skyline, Honda S2000 LM, and Lister Storm race car as your possible prizes. The Seattle 100 miles is up next, where you'll face US sports cars and muscle cars, much like the Stars and Stripes event. The Shelby Cobra is undoubtedly the fastest opponent, but it pits for tyres after just 2 laps, so it isn't at all a threat. Beyond that, the other opponents aren't too bad, and this race can be done in about 70 minutes. Alongside the F1 car, you can get the Nissan GT-R LM road car, Tommy Kaira ZZ2, and the Panoz Esperante yet again. And the final endurance race I want to touch on is the Super Speedway 150 miles. Now, from a driving perspective, this one is quite simple, but the opponent cars are definitely a step up. They're all factory-tuned models from the likes of Spoon, Nismo, and Roof. I think the best strategy for this event is to try and win not through being the fastest, but simply through making fewer stops using harder tyres, just like the Roadster Endurance. If you can pull this off, the potential spoilers include the usual F1 machine, as well as a Renault Clio V6 race car, Tickford Falcon XR8, and Corvette C5R. The remaining 5 endurance races put you up against full-blown race cars, and as you'll need something roughly as fast to win, they don't represent anywhere near as much of a progression skip as the ones I've outlined here. So, the way the Endurance League works in GT3 is an interesting situation. Whilst it very clearly has the potential to break the game and totally annihilate any sense of progression, it wasn't done without reason. It mainly seems to be the result of 2 specific choices. The first one was the choice to include endurance races catering to various types of cars, specifically ones on the lower end of the performance spectrum. The second was the choice to reward players for their effort in beating these long races by giving them the potential to earn some really special cars. When put together, this leads to the game-breaking exploits we see. Gran Turismo 2 is also prone to this as well, the Trial Mountain 30 Laps Endurance being the event that always comes to my mind with that game. This race features mainly European road cars with roughly 200 horsepower, and yet your prize is the Denso Saad Supra GT500. Once again, there is absolutely no reason why this should be the case, other than the fact that the race is 30 laps long. With GT3, they used the same mentality, but took things a step further. The fact that every endurance race, no matter how early in the game you can beat it, can give you a Formula 1 car is quite frankly ridiculous, and they should have known better. In fact, for all of the games after this, the endurance races are actually locked behind progression instead of merely just your license. I have a very strong suspicion that this was done to prevent early game exploits like we see in GT3, while still rewarding players for their time and effort with very good prize cars. Although, the fact that there are many non-endurance events in GT4 where this can still happen makes that seem kind of pointless. In a game that's as tightly designed as GT3, the endurance races seem like major outliers, and that's because they are. But that doesn't mean that they're the only events that can offer major progression skips. It's just that the ones I'm going to show you now are a bit more subtle. For me, the Amateur League represents the ideal midpoint of GT3. You're not quite as restricted as you are in the early game, but the events aren't as painfully long as they can get in the Professional League. As I've shown, there are various routes you can take to get yourself here within a relatively short amount of time, but many of these methods can also set you up for the endgame. The European Championship is an event requiring a National A license. In spite of its name, you don't have to use a European car yourself, but they will be your opponents, and they can be pretty fast. The Pagani Zonda C12, Lotus Elise, and Opel Speedster are a few you really need to watch out for. That said, if you follow my Beetle route for example, the RSI with a few upgrades, like a turbo kit, can get the job done. And if so, we're once again looking at another prize roulette. The 4 outcomes are a Mini Cooper, an R34 GTR in a special colour, a Lotus Elise in a special colour, and the car we're most interested in, the Gillet Vertigo. You'll remember that you can also win this car from the Rome 2 Hours Endurance, but this represents an even quicker method. The whole event takes only about 30 minutes. Of course, compared to an F1 machine, the Vertigo is nothing, but you shouldn't write it off completely. Another important quirk of GT3 is the tuning potential of race cars. In its stock form, the Vertigo makes just over 400 horsepower and sits as a sort of mid-tier race car. As it is, it's not a bad upgrade on what you would have at this point in your playthrough, as it would most likely be your first race car. However, using your prize money, you can then purchase Stage 2 NA tuning to give it well over 700 horsepower. And this is one of the more conservative examples. Many race cars can actually make far more, as we'll soon see. GT3 is kinda strange in the sense that the AI almost have a reverse difficulty curve. With faster cars, they become easier to beat as their driving becomes more erratic, although this is track dependent. The The point I'm trying to make is that when you put all of these factors together, even winning something like the Vertigo can be a ticket into the late game events such as the Gran Turismo World Championship in the Professional League. In the right hands, it can beat the fastest AI opponents, like the Toyota GT1, Nissan R390, and Mazda 787B with ease. This goes to show that it's not just about the car you win, but also how you make use of it. Regardless, we still have to deal with the 1 in 4 chance of getting the Vertigo from the roulette. Of course, we can just use save states to guarantee it, but as GT3 wasn't designed with this in mind, it feels kinda unfair. So, let's just save scum in a more legit way. If you end the 4th of the 5 races with at least a 10-point margin on the 2nd place car in the championship, make sure to save your game before heading to the final race. After this, just skip the final race by quitting out and then receive your prize. If you don't get the car you want, simply reload your save and repeat the process until you do. This trick pretty much guarantees that you get the exact prize you're looking for, except on the Japanese version, which like I said has a different prize manipulation method. So, when paired with one of the beginner league routes I showed you at the start, you can go from a completely brand new save through to having a car capable of beating the toughest professional league events in just a handful of hours, without even resorting to the arcade time trials or endurance races. And if you thought that the European Championship was the only example of this, think again. The American Championship is quite similar. Really, just replace the Euro cars with US machines. The only thing you need to be wary of is that the Corvette C5R is one of the possible opponents. Being a full-on race car, it is much faster than anything else, so if it does appear, just make sure to quit out and reload until it doesn't. As for your prize, there are special colour versions of the Audi TT, Subaru Impreza, and Mazda RX-7 on offer, but the one we really want is the Camaro LM race car. You might remember that this car is also a progression skip in GT4 through that game's Stars and Stripes event, but in GT3 it's even better. With Stage 2 NA tuning, it can get to almost 1000 horsepower. Yet again, this makes it viable against the top prototypes and GT cars, but I will admit that with this much power it can be a handful, and it's also not great on tyre wear. If you started off with the PT Cruiser, this means that you can create an all-American route through this game. But if you're instead looking for an all-Japanese route, that's a little bit more complicated. Unfortunately, the Japanese Championship doesn't give out any race cars, just mid-tier sports cars that are similar to what you'd need to beat the event in the first place. But that's not a problem because I've cooked up a different route. If you save up your cash in the early game, you can buy the Toyota Altezza RS200 for 24,000 credits. Now I will admit that this route is far from the most efficient because it relies on you tuning up the car quite a bit, meaning that you'll have to take part in a fair few races before heading to the event in question. That event is the Altezza Race Championship in the Amateur League. The opponent cars are all highly modified. I estimate you'd have to spend around 30k just on tuning to keep up. But if you do see it through, ignoring the Tom's Chaser and 2 special colour Toyota Vitz, your prize is the Altezza LM race car. What's funny is that this car being a prize is not only also a progression skip in GT4, but you get it from the equivalent Altezza race event in that game too. If we compare them, there are some major differences. The most obvious is that in the GT4 events, the opponent cars are all unmodified, making them much easier to beat. The event is also quite a lot shorter, being about the same as the beginner league Altezza race in GT3. However, there is one way in which the GT3 event has the upper hand: the prize car itself. In GT4, this isn't the Altezza LM race car, it's the Altezza touring car, and its performance is more like a real touring car too, having about 300 horsepower. This represents a massive step down from GT3, where it has more than twice as much. And it gets even crazier, as with a Stage 3 turbo kit, it makes well over 1000 horsepower. Yet again, this helps it to keep up with even the most formidable of opponents. In GT3, a handful of LM race cars can also be fitted with dirt tyres, and the Altezza is one of them. You might think that 1000 plus horsepower and rear-wheel drive would be a terrible combination off-road, but it's actually pretty damn good. Because of this, the Altezza LM may well be one of the best all-rounders in the game. There aren't many cars here which can beat the professional GT World Championship as well as every single rally event, but the Altezza is part of that exclusive club. I don't think it's a coincidence that all of the broken prize cars we've seen so far come from roulettes, because even though there are ways to manipulate them, a 1 in 4 chance of a busted prize car is very different from a guaranteed busted prize car. You could look at it as the game offering a reprieve from some of the more cruel rewards without handing you a free pass. If you do enough events, over time it would naturally balance out. But what if you wanted a surefire method to achieve a progression skip? No ifs or buts. Is that even possible in this game? Well, I think so. The Mercedes SLK compressor is a car that has one real purpose in GT3, to be used in the Legend of Silver Arrow 1 Make event. Outside of this, it isn't really worth using as you can't win it as a prize car, except for the event you need it for anyway, and at 55k it isn't exactly good value. I mean hey, it is a Mercedes after all. But if you do invest the not exactly small amount of money you need to buy it, this does create an opportunity. The Legend of Silver Arrow is also an event in the Amateur League. The situation is very much like the Altezza race. As you come up against highly tuned SLKs, as well as more powerful CLs and CLKs, you'll need to spend a decent amount on upgrades to be competitive. Once again, I estimate around 30k. So, whilst there is a fair amount of setup required, the payoff is definitely worth it. This event is 3 single races that take just over 15 minutes to beat. But the best part is that as it's a single race event, there is only one possible prize car, the Mercedes CLK Touring Car. Whilst its stock 450-ish horsepower doesn't exactly set the world alight, Stage 3 NA tuning brings that up to about 850, plenty enough to hold its own in the late game. So there we are, a 100% guaranteed progression skip in Gran Turismo 3. No prize roulette manipulation required. But you know what? I think I've got one more hidden up my sleeve. This final method requires a little bit of outside-the-box thinking. You'll notice that none of the events I've covered thus far can be found in the professional league. In truth, there are 1 or 2 prize cars here that could be considered progression skips. For instance, getting the TVR Speed 12 from the Tuscan Challenge, or the Altezza LM and Castrol Tom Supra from the Vitz race. But as these events require so much setup, and also last longer than some of the endurance races, I decided not to include them. But there is one event here that I'll make an exception for simply because I find it so interesting. Like the Wind is a single 20-lap race around the test course oval requiring a super license. The unique circumstances of this event mean that we can devise a pretty sneaky scheme. Whilst there may be other cars that you can do this with, my go-to is the Mitsubishi 3000 GT. Effectively, what we're going to do is turn it into a top-speed missile. To achieve this, you need just 2 upgrades, a Stage 4 turbo kit and a full racing transmission. Unfortunately, the turbo kit on its own will set you back 80,000 credits, so you're going to need some quick cash. On PAL, this is easy. Take the Type R routes, beat that championship a couple of times, and then sell both RSXs for a combined 150k, more than enough for the 3000 GT and the upgrades. For other versions of the game, I'm not entirely sure. That might involve just carrying out one of the methods I've already discussed, then selling the prize car. Doing that wouldn't exactly be optimal, but given the price for this event, you might think it's worth it. Either way, once you've got the car and the upgrades, you're good to go. Tuning wise, all you need to do is put the auto slider for the transmission all the way to the right. In the race itself, just put your foot down and unleash the 820 horsepower. The AI are programmed to pit when their tyres wear out, but as we're on a massive oval, there's no benefit, so staying out is an easy way to gain time. Even still, make sure to avoid the Toyota GT1 and Dodge Viper GTS, as even though they make pit stops, they're simply so fast that it doesn't matter. All of the other AI cars are held back by their gearing, so aside from those two, there's nothing to worry about. After about 35 minutes of driving around, you'll win the race and be able to claim your prize, the Mazda 787B. Yep, one of the fastest cars in the game, no upgrades necessary. Admittedly, this example is less about winning a broken prize car, and more just using ingenuity to win an event you really shouldn't be able to, but it's still a progression skip nonetheless. And there you have it, 11 methods to get yourself ahead of the curve in Gran Turismo 3. Now it has to be said that with this video, I've mainly focused on quick ways to get cars that you can use to beat the tougher events in the game, such as those found in the professional league, but that isn't actually the end goal of GT3. To reach the ending of this game, you instead have to win all of the events in the beginner and amateur leagues. However, if that is what you're trying to do, then I still think many of these strategies can help you out. After all, my goal with this video is to not only document these interesting quirks of the game, but also help people enjoy it just a little bit more. On the surface, GT3 may seem like an impenetrable wall that can only be broken down by those who have an innate knowledge of how it works. And whilst I still think this is true to some degree, it's also a game that rewards strategy and problem solving like no other Gran Turismo. I don't know about you, but the satisfaction I get from pulling off some of these methods here is immense. In many ways, it kinda feels like you're outsmarting the developers. Whilst the games after this implemented various design elements to not only mitigate the impact of situations like these, but also prevent them from happening at all, there is a certain charm to the purity of GT3. The fact that if you manage to pull them off, there are no arbitrary level caps or completion requirements to prevent you from properly using these cars is quite freeing. Of course, if you do attempt them, any idea of progression goes out of the window. But what's important to remember is that, unlike GT4 for example, you're not likely to stumble into them by accident. Only through careful planning and consideration can most of these exploits be fully taken advantage of. And for me, that's a compromise that really works. Whilst I've spent a lot of time thinking about progression skips and the various routes that make them possible in GT3, this is a very complex game with many different branching paths. So, if you know of any more examples that fit the bill, let me know about them down below. For now, thanks for watching, and have a good one.